Welcome, everybody, to the Nuggets of Gold podcast and YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be going over the offensive X factors. And if you're listening on YouTube tomorrow, we're going to talk about the defensive guys. Then we're going to talk about Fred's contract because we were kind of on a hiatus for a while. That'll be out the day after that. And then the day after that, we're going to kind of talk about Aaron Rodgers for a little bit. So today's episode, offensive X factors. Aiden, who is your offensive X factor going into training camp this season?
Going into training camp, my offensive X factor is Alex Mack. The Niners center position has been at best a little bit questionable. And I think everybody would probably agree that Mack is an upgrade over Brunskill. He is a little bit on the older side, but if he is able to revert to the last time he was with Kyle Shanahan, where he was arguably the best center in the entire league, that's such a huge component to the Niners offense, and the center has so much more responsibility than you would otherwise think. And say Trey Lance starts, you need this guy, you need the center to know what's going on, especially if you have a young and inexperienced quarterback back there. So I think Alex Mack is going to be huge for the Niners in training camp and throughout the season.
I like that pick a lot. We've talked about, how impactful the center position is in this Kyle Shanahan offense. It gets talked about almost like it's more important than the tackle spots, which is really crazy when you think about it because, you're running a lot of outside zone. And we've seen like what the Niners have done in the past too is they get very, very fast players. And so sealing the edge is such a huge deal. But I kind of wonder, like, you look at offensive tackle, and obviously that's such an important position for every team. But I wonder if the 49ers feel like that interior was such an important part that they just were lacking last year. And when they look at on outside, and of course they re-signed Trent Williams, so it's not like they're not like looking for top tier talent there, but they have George Kittle on the outside, and they have Kyle Juszczyk. Like sealing the edge, they're going to be able to do it really well. But in the interior, that's where they lost some games just because of that, solely because they couldn't dominate inside. And you bring in a veteran player like Alex Mack, he understands the system. Just wondering, Aiden, where do you kind of see his play level? Because I think I've heard like some people act like he is a star player still in today's game. I don't think he's there anymore. I think, he's an above average player, but that's a drastic upgrade from what the 49ers were rolling out the last couple seasons. A lot of injuries in the inside. And you said, Brunskill's been there, like a lot of guys going like, in and out of the lineup. But do you see him as like, where do you see him in terms of his talent now?
He's a guy who I think his most potent weapon is his mind. He's a guy who has been around the league for a long time, knows the Shanahan system well. I almost think that just as important as his play, and I touched on it a little bit, is going to be how much he's able to help Trey Lance and also Aaron Banks, a guy who's right next to him and who easily could be an X factor as well. But I think that Alex Mack has a lot to give the Niners in terms of his mind just as well as his play. He's probably not the player that he was in that first run with Kyle, but he's still a guy who I think is above average. And in this center position where you have to move, I think he's a guy who can still get that done.
Yeah, and you brought up Aaron Banks real quick, and we kind of had him as an honorable mention. I'll get into my X factor after this, but Aaron Banks, he's taller than 6'5", a little bit over 6'5", over 330 pounds. Don't know what his weight will be going into camp, but that was at the combine, or the combine time, I guess, since there was no combine this year. But you look at him, and he is extremely explosive. He's a huge guy, but there are some questions about like how he can play in space, which was I was kind of shocked when they took him. But he is a guy, if he can come in, fill that right guard spot, same type of situation as Alex Mack. Like it's such an upgrade of who they had rolling out there last year. These two guys on the interior could make a huge difference. And we've talked about it in the past, on air and off air. I think this is the best 49ers offensive group that we've seen in quite some time. It's line. So do you think Aaron Banks is close to like the impact that Alex Mack will have?
Yeah, I definitely think it's close. Like we mentioned, this center in the right guard spot has been very inconsistent. And it's a big reason why Mike McGlinchey was not awesome last year. I think Aaron Banks and Alex Mack are both super duper important for his development. He's on his 5th year option right now. or we just picked it up. And it's really interesting for his future going forward. He's a guy that I think is pretty manageable cap wise that you could bring back and as a starting caliber tackle. But I think with a constant presence right next to him, he'll only improve. And I think this whole 49ers offensive line is probably the best that we've seen in the Shanahan tenure, probably the best since those Harbaugh years. And I don't think that they're going to get the credit that they're due throughout the season, with how important the Niners running game is going to be. They're going to be the guys creating holes for Sermon and Mostert and potentially Lance, which is super exciting. But like we mentioned earlier, this Niners team has a chance to lead the league in rushing and potentially break the rushing record, with how much they like to run the ball. And this offensive line, I think, is geared to potentially do that. You got one of the best tackles. You got upgrades at center and right guard. Hopefully, Laken Tomlinson is criminally underrated. And I think that this whole group could be considered as an X factor, but with the addition of a guy like Alex Mack, and the second round pick of a guy like Aaron Banks, who I think we've forgotten that he was their second round pick, the guy picked right after Trey Lance. They want him to play right away, and I think that he's going to be a definite upgrade.
Yeah, I'm super excited to see how this group meshes early on and just how they look throughout the season. My X factor going to be Deebo Samuel, and I don't think he's going to turn into the wide receiver one. I think Ayuk has clearly cemented that. He's not going to be second in targets either. It's either going to be Ayuk and Kittle at the top. I think, and you're going to have him a couple notches down in terms of target and volume in the offense. But if he's on the field, if he's healthy, and if he's playing well, that can be huge just because of the mismatches he brings. We've seen how dominant he is, where he can, like just basically beat anyone on a slant with his size, his ability to do that. And if he gets into the secondary, it's not like safeties have an easy time bringing him down. And I mean, he's thrown guys down like they're ragdolls multiple times in his early in his career. Big question for him is, of course, going to be health. Last year only started in 5 games. Rookie year, he only missed 1 game, but like he was good overall. But it's going to be very, very interesting to kind of see where he's at this year, because if he's a guy that is just a threat with the football, even if he's only getting a handful of touches every game, that can be absolutely huge for this team. So he's my X factor if he's playing well, because he's not going to get a ton of targets, like I said, and he's going to be impactful in the run game. But if you have him motioning, back and forth, and you have to, be careful because you have George Kittle, who's another nightmare for defenses. And then Brandon Ayuk, who, if you guys haven't seen Brandon Ayuk's route tree last year, he basically is green in every single category. Like, he's winning all across the board. So that can just bring something where it gets like, all right, what are we supposed to do? Because this is a running offense that we can't stop at all. And then they have 2 dominant weapons. And then this third guy, if we overlook him, he can take it to the house on any play, and he can be used in so many different ways. So I think he's an offensive X factor, and that's being the third option in the receiving game. Because if he's really good, the sky's the limit for this offense, in my opinion. So that's why I'm taking Deebo Samuel.
I think that's a great choice. We saw how important the addition of Sanders was in 2019. And people forget that we started that season 8-0, 9-0, where Deebo was probably the number 1 guy. He last year, because of the limitations at quarterback and the poor offensive line play, he was doing a lot more gadget stuff, and that's what we saw in the Super Bowl. I think he could be a consistent winner outside. He hasn't had a chance to do that really since Sanders took over that number 1 role. And he's obviously not going to be number 1 behind Ayuk and Kittle. He's probably the third mouth to feed. But I think he's a guy who can win a couple different ways. And during that Seattle game, in 2019, he was consistently beating, albeit poor, Seattle corners. But he's a guy that I think is a receiver more than a gadget guy. He's been used as a gadget guy the last year and change. But he's a guy who I think that's a great point. If he can win outside as well as do the gadget stuff, the sky is the absolute limit for this offense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on there. I think that'll probably do it for these X factors. I do want to bring up really quickly, I'm going to be doing a Trey Lance report for each practice. I'm going to do it on TikTok. Reluctantly, I am starting a TikTok, but I'm going to be doing it on TikTok, possibly doing it on YouTube Shorts. This segment right here is going to come out on the first day of camp. So if you're checking this out, you like the content, make sure to go check out the TikTok and YouTube Short stuff. I will link both of those in the description as well. But that's going to do it for this segment.